Right, I thought I'd just talk through a bit about how this desk is powered, because I learned a lot while trying to put it together, and I think came up with a few interesting tricks. So let's start with the desk itself. Right, so the things that need to be powered on this desk, and everything's powered off a single power cable. It's a 5-meter power cable you can plug into the wall. So this, where you can roll this desk around, you've got a lot of flexibility. So the things that are obviously powered are the ATEM Pro Mini ISO, the Lilliput sort of monitor screen, and also if you've got peripherals plugged in, the adapters have the power going in. So for example, if I've plugged in this laptop to feed USB, so feed HDMI, so it's feeding HDMI there, it's also providing the power, so I'm not losing power to the laptop. Or if I plugged in an iPad with the adapter around here, then same thing, that's got power going in. So all of those things are just powered off, as you'd expect. Underneath on this side, there's like a four-way adapter on a long cable. That's where everything's plugged in, and that includes this little Netgear router. So I can stream straight from the desk without using the computer. So all that's, in some sense, that's all pretty obvious stuff. The thing that perhaps wasn't so obvious was all the things that plug into it. So this desk, it's a sit-stand desk, you can roll it around, but you can plug in different cameras to it. So if you look on this side, based on the ATEM Pro, we've actually got 4 HDMI little extender cables plugged into the desk, so you're not fiddling around the back of the desk. You haven't got any risk of knocking cables out, or just in fact wearing out the box. That's the expensive bit. Extender cables are cheap, but each of these extender cables also has with it a little DC barrel socket. So that's a 5.5mm DC barrel socket that I'm feeding 12 volts to. So every HDMI input to the ATEM Mini also has this 12 volt barrel plug available. And this is actually pretty neat, because what it means is, let's say let me just get rid of my laptop a second. Let me just get this out of the way. What it means is you can start building cables that look a bit like this. So I've just got, this is just a 5-meter HDMI cable, quite nice and thin, and a 5-meter DC extension cable. They're just taped together all the way along. So suddenly this becomes not only a way to take the video feed from the desk to from the camera to your desk, but also had to take power from the desk directly to the camera. So you actually end up with effectively one cable going to the camera. There's no extra power cables, no batteries, no nothing like that. So 2 things here. Right, the first is it's a standard 5.5mm DC barrel that I've gone with, and I've kind of, standardized on that. So all of the cables have 12 volts. So why did I choose that? Well, most, sort of mid-range video equipment seems to either take 12 volts or have very flexible input, so it's like 12 to 24 volts. It's, designed for things like running off DTAP batteries and all this sort of stuff. So they've actually got their step-down voltage regulators inside. So if you take 12 volts, it plugs into most things, but also it allows you to cope with the long, 5-meter cable. So this has actually got, some resistance, so you're going to get a voltage drop. So by taking these things and then being able to drop them to a voltage that the device actually needs, so that might be 5 volts, 8.7 volts, whatever it is, but doing that near the device, you've got 2 advantages. One, you can go a long distance and cope with the voltage drop you're going to get, because you're down converting it right near the device you plug it into. But second, obviously, if everything's taking 12 volts, you've got this really flexible system. So this basically out the back here, because each of these has got 12 volts, it's totally generic. We can plug in whatever cameras, and in this case we're actually plugging in, well, firstly let's take a look at this. So this is just a Panasonic camcorder, HDMI micro connector. So this 5-meter cable happens to have on the other end a micro connector and a DC barrel, but it takes 5 volts. So what I've got is just a little DC adapter I made, or modified, that takes the 5.5mm 12 volt in and outputs the 5 volts it needs. Okay, and even if this is dropped a little bit because of the length of the wire, doesn't matter, because that regulator is going to take it to 5 volts. In this case, I couldn't actually find a regulator that exactly was what I wanted here, but what I got was something very similar. This is off Amazon. It's 12 volt in to USB socket out, so the sort of thing you might use in a car or something like that, I guess. Not too expensive. So I just snip those off, change the connectors, and what that means is if I take this, so HDMI goes in there, your 12 volts that is coming down the cable goes into this little adapter, and then that goes in. And so now you have your camera unit on a single 5-meter cable that can just plug straight into one of the HDMI connectors. Okay, so that's for that camera, but one of the nice things is that because this is pretty generic now, pretty much everything can be powered off 12 volts, I can do the same things. So if I just spin this camera around here, so this unit, which is we've got the teleprompter here based on a Lilliput, that's an A11 screen, so 10.2 inch or something screen, and that takes 12 volts or 12 to 24 volts in, I can't remember. And the G5 camera here, which takes something like 8.7 volts, and all that's got is just a dummy battery coming out to a D-tap. So actually there's loads of these power adapters around. Some of them are pretty ropey. Some of them claim certain things. The nice thing about this one I found, so basically a D-tap adapter, is that the step down converter is inside it, and of course D-tap it expects actually 12 volt upwards, so it could be 12 volts, could be 14 volts, whatever, and then that's just a little, I've just adapted that again to a 12 volt DC barrel, but also that single DC cable is also powering the screen, right? Because I've just got a splitter in there, so that 12 volt that plugs in, it just gets split and it can power both the devices. So again, from that single 12 volt out the back of the thing, so it's actually this one here, this single 12 volt supply here, that one is actually powering that screen and the GH5, and theoretically it could power also, if I had a mic on the top, the power that needed some sort of power, it could power that as well. And I guess that's, at some level, that is one of the nice advantages. So you can get loads of these sorts of adapters, which are 1 to however many you want, if you don't want to wire up your own, which is, I'd recommend buying these just, because they're molded plugs and they're not going to break nearly as easily as some of the solderable plugs and sockets I bought, which, to be honest, the quality was pretty awful. These are going to be pretty robust. So, for example, in the back of this desk, I've got a 4-way splitter that just goes to each of the HDMI lines, and I've actually got a separate splitter that is splitting so that I can power the screen as well. A couple of other learnings, I guess. So yeah, being able to power everything on this desk plus all the cameras and other peripherals off a single socket, that works really well. And just the reduction in cable mess, neatness, that works really well. A couple of things I've found. Originally I had everything powered off a single, so under here, one on this side, there's actually a 12 volt power supply that I got, very powerful one, so can run as much as you want off it. But what I noticed is the ATEM Mini Pro ISO, it does have a tendency to brown out if there's spikes on the power supply or anything like that. So for example, when you're plugging something in, it suddenly draws a load of current for a short amount of time, that drops the power supply, this thing browns out, which is not what you want necessarily. So actually this device, the ATEM Mini Pro ISO, I'm actually running that off its stock power supply. So that's one 12 volt power supply going into this device, and then everything else is running off that sort of generic high power 12 volt supply, just splitting. So this screen and then all the camera feeds. So that was something that I just think it's a good idea to try and keep the power to this thing as stable as possible, because it doesn't matter if your camera flicks out, but if this cuts out, okay, it might be game over. Second thing I learned, luckily soon enough, is these cables, when making them up, that works great. Obviously choosing the type of HDMI cable, that will choose how flexible and light it is. Maybe that matters, maybe it doesn't. The thing I got wrong initially, I was using cable ties to zip tie all along this cable, and that was lethal, because once you've cut these off, unless you go and burn them or something, it leaves it a really sharp thing. Normally that wouldn't matter, but when you're dealing with long cables, you tend to be running your hand along it, coiling it, whatever, and you could feel that was, you're going to cut your hands up. So actually just a little bit of insulation tape all along there, or it could be anything, it could be heat shrink tubing or whatever, but basically not cable ties, steer clear of them. Right, and I think that's basically it. Yeah, the nice thing is you've got 4 HDMI into this. Everything on the desk is powered off one cable, so you can just roll this around so that way you want single cable, everything powers up. But yeah, the fact that each of the 4 HDMI inputs has the ability to also run power to whatever you're plugging in, that's super neat. And actually for setup it's much quicker, but importantly you're not dealing with lots of power bricks, dangling wires, and these tend to be the wires also that are kind of short or you need to extend. So yeah, definitely recommend this setup. Tell you how I'll get on as we play with it more.